I'm your host, Micah Versman, and you're listening to the Producer Podcast. Today is the first of our special three-part season finale, where we are going to look at the relationship between producers and department heads. Up first, we're joined by production designer Morgan Schutz. Morgan has worked on a number of feature films in this role, including Treasure Lies and It's a Life Worth Living. We're excited to have her here today to go over what a producer should keep in mind when working with a production designer. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to the show, Morgan.
Hey, it's good to be here.
So I can't remember if I've ever talked to you about this, but maybe share first a little bit of how you started doing art department and some of the different projects you've worked on.
That's actually a really good question. I actually come from a family of artisans and craftsmen, and basically every member of my family, all my aunts, my grandparents, my dad, were all very handy with their hands. You know, everything from sewing to pottery, leatherworking, woodworking, model building. So I grew up in a family that really valued creativity and creating things with their hands. Um, and growing up in an environment like that really led to me wanting to, learn these skills and make them my own. And my family really encouraged that. Along with that, they really encouraged a love of story. So where love of story and love of handwork and creating and designing met was in production design.
Okay.
And then from there, it was pretty basic, getting on, working on short film projects with others and working in the art department on several films, and then starting to do production design on my own on both features and short films.
Nice. I guess my first question would be, at what point in that pre-production timeline should a producer start looking around to bring an art director onto the project?
Generally, I'd say as soon as you have a director, as soon as you have a director of photography, it's important to have a production designer on board and starting conversations about the look of the film, about the feel of the film, because that can really aid you as you're starting to do location scouting and planning ahead for that. That the director and the director of photography and the production designer are kind of like this trifecta, this trio that work together to establish the whole look and feel of the movie and bounce ideas off of each other. And that equips the production designer so that the production designer can fully fulfill the vision of the director. So very early on in the pre-production process, it's important to get your production designer involved.
And when the producer's reaching out to, let's say, you, what type of information do you like the producer to be able to, just like off the top of his head, answer for you in that first phone call or email conversation, as you're trying to decide, do you want to join the project?
First off, some questions that I'll generally ask when approached by a producer about coming onto a project are, what's the nature of the project? Where's the location going to be? Like the state location, usually. Is this
Okay.
a project I'm going to have to travel for? Am I driving or flying? Because that affects what personal props I can bring to the project. I try not to carry prop weapons on an airplane because that's just a no-go. um, I'll usually ask how much pre-production is being planned for the project. How much time do I have to plan ahead? How many shooting days is the project going to be? Um, are there going to be off days between shooting days that art department has to go and prep sets for the next day? What's the plan for for lodging, is the art department going to be able to stay together at a single location? Is there going to, like, what do we have in mind for storing props? Like, what kind of storage space do we have, especially for a larger project? The amount of set dressing and props can really add up. So it's very helpful to have a dedicated room or space that all of that can be stored and cataloged in. Of course, the question, what's the day rate going to be? Is pre-production going to be paid?
Hmm.
And another question that I'll usually ask is what size the actual full art department is. Is it in the budget to have a good sized team of 4 or more people? For a feature, it's generally much, much easier to work with an art department of 4 plus people. So the amount of people that are going to be able to be brought onto my team for a project is really helpful to know. And those are just a couple of the kind of questions that I'll ask to feel out a project.
Since you brought up the team and that for art department,
Hmm.
uh, when it comes to like actually building out the team that's going to make up the art department, how can the producer be helping you do that?
On the whole, I generally really prefer to be able to handpick the people that I have working on my team, people that I've worked with in the past on projects, and people that are part of my core team that I can't imagine doing a film set without because they're such incredible workers and so good at what they do. There may be some times where somebody that I would love to have on my team is unavailable. And in those cases, it's really helpful sometimes to have suggestions from a producer on people they may have worked with or people they know that have experience. As a general rule, though, I prefer to be able to pick my people because I know I can trust them. And I know that I have a good working relationship with them, that we jive well together, um, and that our strengths and weaknesses and skill sets complement each other.
Okay. And then when you're kind of working on that, are you doing a lot of the like almost an I'd almost say like initial negotiating?
Oh, it really depends. Sometimes I'd say on the whole, it's generally really helpful. Like if the producer is asking me, "Hey, do you have recommendations for filling these crew positions that'll be on your team?" Generally, it's really helpful for me, knowing ahead of time, "Hey, this is what the day rate is. This is what the deal is. Here's what's happening." Because then for me, as I'm reaching out to people, it is helpful to have the information to tell them up front and then pass their contact on to the producer to finalize the details and sign contracts. I've done some projects where I know the overall, not too much of the general day rate details, and I let the
Hmm.
producer discuss that directly with my team members. Um, but on the whole, it's generally easier to know the information up front when reaching out to team members.
So for a producer, obviously one of the biggest parts of pre-production is figuring out and securing that budget.
Oh yeah.
So what advice or tips do you have for producers when they're putting together that art department budget?
Yes. Another question, yeah, that I generally ask a producer in that initial phone call is, what the production budget for the art department is going to be. And it varies between projects. Different projects call for different things, and it's very, very helpful for a producer to have thought through that beforehand and know what they're budgeting and what they're able to put in the art department budget. Sometimes once you bring the art department on, there may be changes that need to be made in the budget if the production designer is reading through the script and seeing, oh, we're having this large set that's going to be need to be built, and we're going to have to add another 1,000 to the budget for that. Or depending on if you're actually building a complete set, a set versus going to just a location and set dressing it. Of course, the budget is going to vary between a short film and a feature film, and there's so many different factors in with that. Um, most low budget features, like feature films, generally have an art department budget between 1,500 and 2,500. Short films are generally much less than that because, there's less content that's being covered. So some of the factors that really come into play when you're determining your budget for the art department is how many locations are we seeing, individual locations in the script, because the amount of locations translates to the amount of set decor, the amount of individual set looks that need to be created. Is this a period piece? Is this going to be a medieval film where we're having to build all the sets from scratch? Is this a modern day general family film where we're shooting in existing locations? Is this going to be a futuristic film? Is this going to be a historical film that's being shot on historical locations? And are we going to need historical props? Historical projects will generally increase your art department budget, I'd say up to double
Okay.
what it would be otherwise, at least. And sometimes that can be done very easily. I've worked on a number of historical projects, and historical projects are some of my favorites because I love figuring out how we can make that work together of having a budget and still getting the historical look and authenticity without breaking the bank.
Once you're on the project, you've built your team, you've gone through the pre-production process.
Mm-hmm.
How can a producer be of help to you during the actual production of the film?
When you're working on a project that your producer is also your locations manager or something of the sort, where the producer is doing a lot of the reaching out and contacting for locations, for vehicles, you name it, it's really helpful to be in close contact with the producer to be able to hear, oh, we have secured this location. Here are the location photos. Because that helps me as I'm planning ahead and seeing, all right, this is what we have to plan ahead for and buy or make or build to be able to transform that location into the location that the audience will see on screen. Sometimes in the script, we may come across strange or difficult props to obtain, and being able to talk to the producer and say, hey, we're looking for on a project I worked on recently, we were looking for like an old time doctor's scale,
Okay.
but not the digital kind that are in offices now, but the actual manual ones where you have the weights that you slide along the bar to find the accurate weight. And we needed one of those, which I had one in my garage, but that was like 15 states away, so I couldn't bring it, and I hadn't seen that in the script beforehand. I believe it had been written in after I had arrived. So, being able to talk to the producer and say, hey, do we have contacts that we can ask for about that? That's very, very useful for obtaining those kind of specialty or possibly expensive, hard to get props.
That's good. And you brought up something I hadn't even thought of, but rewrites, because obviously those are usually happening all the way at least up till you start shooting. But even on a lot of my projects during shooting, you're still rewriting. So, like, what are things as these rewrites are happening that maybe a producer needs to be thinking through from an art department perspective?
Yeah, that's a really great thought. Um, I'd say that I've had script rewrites on several of the projects that I've been a part of, and they always, they always throw art department for a little bit of a loop because you might have been planning for a location that totally got written out, or now you suddenly have a new location that is going to be, you're going to need a little bit of money added to the budget for that because it wasn't something that had originally been budgeted in. So definitely when rewrites happen, or if best case scenario, the script's been finalized ahead of time and there's been enough planning that you're not having script rewrites during production. That's the ideal scenario. But
Yeah.
when they do happen, if our department can just receive copies of the new scripts, just as soon as possible, it really makes our job easier.
Okay.
So if there's a prop that we suddenly discover that we need the day of that we didn't plan ahead for, or because we're humans and we plan ahead, but sometimes we do forget things. When there is a forgotten prop like that, generally falls into something that's more of a departmental concern.
Okay.
When something like that happens, though, I'll just generally talk to the AD and say, hey, I've sent out one of the members of my art team, because thankfully I have people on my art team and I'm not one man banding it. Um,
Hmm.
that's one reason why it's really helpful to have multiple people on your team, because having people to send on runs and prep for the next day is very important. Um, but generally, I'll just notify the first AD and say, hey, this prop for this next scene is one that we're working on obtaining it. Can we move that scene later in the day? Is that a possibility, to make sure that we have the time to obtain that? So usually it's something that's just handled within the art department, and I'll just talk to the first AD about that to have that all handled. And
Okay.
the producer can focus on the other things that are on his plate for the day.
Sounds good. And then when it comes to like the tech scout, is it helpful for you as like the art director to have like your whole team like going on the tech scout, or is it more helpful for them to be back wherever they're staying, working on props or out shopping and stuff like that?
Mm. Yeah. So ideally, when you're working, you have, like, on a larger project, you have both a production designer and an art director.
Okay.
And like the main difference is that the production designer is focused on the design and look and feel, and like the production designer carries the vision of the director um, on the art side and visual side of the project, working with the director and the DP. And then the art director is kind of like, as the first AD is to the director, the
Okay.
art director is to the production designer. In terms of the director is the production designer's right hand. They work together on like scheduling and planning ahead for hey, when does this need to be done by? Um, Oftentimes the art director will be heading up the budget side as well and keeping track of that. On many smaller projects, they get combined into one. So I've done both, working with an art director, working kind of as an art director, and working as both an art director and a production designer. So I say that to preface this because, in general, you don't need the whole art department there. Um, you
Okay.
know, for a tech scout, grip is not going to bring every single grip. It's just the key grip who will go on the scout. Um, so generally, I, as a production designer, would want to go on those tech scouts to plan ahead. And if I have an art director, then I want my art director to come along too. Or if I am an art director working with a production designer, I'm going to want to go along too, because I'm heavily involved. The art director is heavily involved with all that planning. So generally having at least one or two representatives for our department is very useful. There have been some times where I was working on something and not available to go on a tech scout. And in that case, I sent one of my set dressers to the
Okay.
location in my place and had them take very detailed photos. And then we just had a meeting about what we were going to do for that location when they got back from the scout.
One of the common things, at least with all the production designers and art directors I've worked with, is they keep all of the receipts, and there's usually a lot of returns at the end of the shoot. Are there things as like a producer I can do to help make doing all that purchasing and returns and then tracking it easier
Mm.
for you?
Yeah, that's definitely something really good to think about. One thing that's really helpful is, for especially larger productions, having paid wrap days for your art department, where they're still working, they're still putting time in on the clock. They're finishing sorting the props, taking the ones to the producer for storage that the production company is going to keep long term, returning ones that didn't get used or were not needed, and trashing anything that is just of no value, not worth keeping. So that's still all work that is being put in by the art department for production. And so having, as able paid wrap days for some subset, generally not the entire art department. It doesn't take the entire art department to go through
Mm-hmm.
everything. But having a paid wrap day or 2 or 3, depending on the size of production, for the art department to go through and settle their accounts per se as the production comes to an end, allows the producer to focus on his end of things. So that's work that he's not having to deal with later. But that basically my goal is at the end of a production, I have my envelope of receipts and a spreadsheet with my final cost analysis and a box of whatever props the producer wanted to keep. And that's what I hand him, and he doesn't have any work at the end of the day that he's having to do to wrap up my department.
When it comes to like the producer kind of lining up transportation for art department, what should he be looking for to help figure out, like, do we need, a U-Haul or a box truck or something like that for certain days of the production? Or is this something that a minivan, or if it's, sometimes on indie ones, art directors are just using their cars.
Right. I've worked on some productions where we did rent a U-Haul some of the time, mainly to move around furniture for a set that was being addressed a couple different ways for different time periods. It generally depends on how much large set dressing you're moving, how many large props. For the most part, a lot can be transported using just a minivan or a standard van. But sometimes, U-Hauls are very useful for transporting large living room sets, etc. So that's definitely a conversation that would be good for a producer to have with your production designer, is asking, hey, is this needed? What days are we going to need it? Ultimately, that doesn't always fit into the budget for these lower budget projects, but it's helpful when it's needed. But it's also fairly easy for art department to work around things. In general, though, when possible, having a dedicated art department van, whether that's a minivan, ideally a little bigger van, super ideally that U-Haul truck. Camera has their own van, grip has their own van, art department ideally should have their own van too. It makes sorting and storage of props and tools, just like, grip has their tools that are a lot more visible, that everybody sees with their lighting stands and everything. Art department has their save the world bags of odds and ends that nobody else would think to bring to set. Our command strips, our own gaff tape, Sharpies, scissors, you name it, paper. Just being able to have all that on site not only diminishes the amount of last minute trips that have to be made, but it also can help with not having to spend as much money on your budget because you're having to run to the store to buy something else that didn't get packed up in the van that day, or didn't get put in the car. Having a home base where art department's resources and tools and props and set dressing live really helps, especially those last minute times when the director's like, do we have a vase that we can put here? Or the DP's like, do we have a plant that we can use for foregrounds? That ends up being really helpful and pays off in the long run, especially on longer projects.
Nice. I like that term you used, the save the world bag or whatever. I've never heard it put that way. So my final question here is there anything specific you wish producers understood about the art department? Like maybe this is something like every set you end up on,
Mhm.
you have to explain like why art department needs this or why this idea doesn't
Mm.
work. And if more producers just knew that to begin with,
Mm.
it'd make your life way easier.
Oh my. It's a topic I try to be gracious about, but also it's really important. It's explained like this. A lot of the time, we have projects that are low budget and they're trying to save money, but also people's lives are made of time, and time is money. So a lot of times, instead of throwing money at a problem, you see producers will be throwing people at a problem. Um, and that means people working overtime, working long hours, not getting enough sleep, which can lead to like less productive hours that you're actually working, and can be dangerous when you have people making commutes and driving, that it increases the danger of car accidents, especially at night. And the art department only has a limited amount of time. There's only 24 hours in every day, just like everybody else. Um, and even though the art department works magic, at a certain point, the art department can't work magic anymore, or it becomes dangerous for the art department to be spending as much time as they are on a project. Um, and the way that that can be really helped, to allow the art department to have the time to actually rest, um, and to be able to be safe and productive, is having off days included in the schedule, particularly for those long 1-2 month shoots. Having 2-day weekends is very, very helpful for the art department, because art department works on their off days. um, Camera can have the day off when they have an off day. Art department's still working. Art department is doing returns from the past week. Art department is going shopping for the next week. They're building sets for the next day, building set pieces. Um, Oftentimes, they may be staying up late into the night on just your general shooting days. And so having that off day, um, for so it's generally for 2-day weekends, that's generally like Saturday and Sunday. So having that first off day where we can have our working off day, that we're actually still working, and then our second off day where we're actually getting a chance to have a day of rest, because rest is both scientifically and biblically important. Um, on the seventh day, God rested, so having a chance to actually rest, um, boosts the art department's productivity. It boosts their, not only their attitude and their energy, but also their creativity, which helps the project to be better. Um, and it also gives them a chance to physically rest, which makes them safer. So all around, it's good for everybody. So ultimately, having the not only the money but the time budgeted in for art department is something I think that not all producers think ahead of time for, but it's something that can really enhance their production behind the scenes.
That is a really good thought to end on. So thank you very much for
Hmm.
coming on the show today to talk with us.
My pleasure. It's been awesome.
Now we're pleased to welcome another guest to today's show, Gaffer Grip Grant Cadwell. Grant has worked as a gaffer and grip on a number of short films and features, including Countercolumn, Wheelchair, and Vindication, as well as working in the corporate space. Welcome to the show, Grant.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, maybe to start, just kind of tell people a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Grant Cadwell. I'm a gaffer and lighting guy based in central Wisconsin. Probably 75% of the lighting work that I do is in the corporate and commercial space, which I really love. And primarily, I work on sort of the smaller shoots, supporting people who are usually like a one-man band, but then sometimes there will be a project that will present itself where they just need that extra support. And sometimes it can be really hard to uh, set up these complicated lighting setups when you also need to be dealing with client relations and uh, setting up audio and composition and all these different things. So to have just one extra person to take care of the lighting completely, and so the person who's uh, doing that, shooting that project, directing, producing, um, just to have that one stressor off their plate can be really helpful. So, and then another side of what I do is more on the narrative and these larger shoots. And in those cases, it's a lot less bringing in kind of an extra hand or kind of delegating a certain part of the process. It's more bringing a lot of insurance to the table in the sense of kind of whatever's thrown at the production, whether it's weather related, a location change last minute, having the resources and the manpower and the skill sets to be able to pivot with that is always really fun and exciting and an interesting challenge that makes me really love this part of the industry.
So I guess my first question for you, and kind of understanding how a producer can help the lighting department, is when somebody or when a producer calls you up about a potential job, like what information is helpful for them to be able to either just straight up provide to you or know, so that if you ask a question related to it, they can answer it right away instead of having to go look it up and email or call you back or something like that.
Yeah, so there's four questions that I like to ask a producer. And so if they have the information there on the initial call, that's super helpful. The first question is just what? So what are we shooting? It's kind of simple, but like if they can very clearly articulate, like this is a really polished, like 30-second spot, or this is a 2.5 minute like interview and like b-roll kind of video, or this is a narrative shoot, or this is, well, whatever the kind of defining factors for the project are, that can tell you a lot just in and of itself, because then you can start to immediately be running through your mind like, oh, if this is a 30-second spot, the gear package is going to look a whole lot different than if this is a longer piece.
Mhm.
Then I mean, just knowing logistics of when and where. So those are the second and third questions. Where are you filming this? What are the not even the specific locations, but just logistically where in the state. So for me, if it's just like, oh, this is where in Wisconsin, local to me, that's going to be a whole lot different if it's somewhere else. Um, Knowing when it's happening, uh, sort of the logistical constraints of, are we having a prep day? Is this just just show up and shoot this thing? Are there meetings that are related to that I'm going to have to schedule out for, whether in person or virtual? And then kind of how much is the fourth question. So in the sense of what's the budget for either me just as a single person, but also and probably primarily, is there budget to bring on other crew members? How much money do we have to invest in rentals? And I feel like if you couple those four questions together in just your initial call, you're like, your leaps and bounds forward in knowing, okay, is this going to be a good fit or not? Because that's the first real thing that I'm trying to figure out is, am I a good fit for the project? Do they need a person? Do they need a lighting guy on the shoot? So figuring out some of those key details can be helpful.
So you mentioned, one of the things you kind of talk about there is like meetings, whether they're in person or virtual. So when you're on productions that are having kind of like those additional meetings, what type of information do you usually hope to get from those? Because I know I've been on some of those where it's like I get to the end of the meeting and I felt like I didn't even need to be there, and I just wasted an hour, 2 hours, whatever it was. So
yeah, I mean that's a great point, because that is like the conundrum that you run into with like a sort of bring all the department heads together, because sound may not need to be there to just, he's just like, he or she's just there, or lighting person. It's just like, it can be a real pain sometimes if there isn't some really important information. However, I think that even if I walk away not having had to say anything, or if there was no real new information, I think that I find it really helpful to just be there to put out any fires, or to like nip something in the bud if it's a really bad idea. Um, because sometimes these meetings are where the ideas get hatched for problem solving, right? And it's really important. But if you're not there, even just to like give your input, even if they go ahead with something that would make it hard for lighting, it's just like lighting or rigging or whatnot. It's like, to know, to be there to kind of give your professional input, I think is really, really important, even if you don't glean information. But to your to your question specifically, what am I hoping to gain from this? Um, I think that a lot of it is just figuring out what's kind of the battle plan. So like, um, there's sort of the 1,000-foot view where this is kind of what the client needs. These are the key resources that we have. Um, like for some projects, the key resource is time, and they don't have the manpower. So then, everyone's on the same page of, this is kind of the resources that we have, the challenges that we have, and then this is how we're going to leverage those correctly. So kind of the general stuff is really helpful. But then I like to get a good idea of what's the look that we're going for. Sometimes the DP is just going to DP and director completely going to kind of just keep that. That's going to be dialogue between them, and I'll just be coming on as more of a technician. But to know what the look is that they're going for is really helpful, so that I can collaborate with them and be more proactive in solving problems. Knowing about locations, I think, is huge. So then if it's an in-person meeting and you're doing a scout, that's a really great thing for sure. Just knowing what the schedule is, and getting a feel for the people that you have on the project too. Like, just what's the chemistry between the department heads, and how can you kind of fit into that well.
So with like the schedule, 'cause everybody kind of does it differently. So is it more helpful for you to like just be given kind of like the final schedule, and they're like, we can kind of still move the times for these different scenes in this day around, but it needs to stay like all these scenes on this particular day? Or is it more helpful to hear what some of the early schedules are, so that you can offer input? Like if there's a bunch of day and night scenes and they're wanting to mix them up, you can be like early on, can we move these to different days or something like that?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. I think that it really depends on how proactive the DP is in regards to lighting. So if the DP, quote unquote, is like more of a shooter, director, producer type person, then I might want to be more involved with some of the early on discussions, especially like day exteriors where you're trying to like map out the sun and like plan out like good coverage, and to make sure that you're shooting at the most pleasing time of day. But then if the DP like can hold their own in terms of lighting, and they want to take charge of that, then I think that I appreciate involvement, sort of on the day, as far as how should we mix and match these scenes on a specific day, or even probably primarily what shot should we start with, and are we going to be shooting ourselves in the foot if we light the close up and then go out to the wide, or different little things like that. But yeah, I think it really depends on the DP, because I think a really good DP is going to know lighting in and out, and they're going to be able to converse closely with the first AD and producer and director to make sure that the lighting team, that we're set up to do our job well.
Okay. So I was talking with people at the One Film Festival earlier this year, and it came out, that like I like producing, but I also like doing the occasional G&E work. And the
Mm-hmm.
one DP there actually got really excited because he was like, finally a producer that understands the realm of lighting. So for you, what are some aspects of just about lighting in general that you wish producers understood?
Well, yeah, it is funny because we have worked together in the capacity of me being a gaffer and you being a producer, and I'll echo what you were saying of like, and that is a super fun dynamic that you don't get to see, where someone understands your department really well. But like, I think that things that would be really helpful, and that it is really helpful when you meet an experienced producer who understands it, is lighting and camera both get a bad rap sometimes for being, and hair and makeup, I would throw them in there as well, that they get a bad rap for kind of taking a lot of time. And and it's true that you can kind of keep tweaking into eternity with all of those departments, maybe not so much camera, but I think that realizing that there's a spectrum of success as far as lighting, um, there's never a moment, like camera can get set up and like they've got their dolly out and they've got their shots framed up, media is good to go, like that, they're like at 100%, and you could say that it's like they couldn't improve upon their situation anymore. um, but with lighting, it's like you can kind of always keep pushing for better and keep tweaking. And honestly, by the second or third take, I'll usually see something. If I'm watching the monitor, I'll be like, ooh, that needs to be adjusted. So I think understanding that lighting is a spectrum and being able to communicate with both your DP and your gaffer to know where are we trying to achieve, what level of quality are we trying to hit, and at what point have we hit that. Because I think this also plays into your gear package, and this is more of a producer thing. A lot of times when I'm putting together a gear package, I'll put together like the 100% gear package, like every tool that we would need so that we're in really good shape. And then I have to go back and say, okay, it needs to be 80% of that because the cost is just not good. So I'll kind of start picking off items. So I think that for producers to understand, success in lighting is a spectrum, and being upfront and transparent with the lighting team to say, this is how important lighting is to this project. So, and understanding that a lighting person's going to want to go 100%, and they want it to be as good as possible for the producer and for the director to have that awesome project. But having a transparent conversation with them about what is the focus of this project. Is it to have just rock star lighting, or is it primarily a production design heavy piece or an acting heavy piece? I think that's really important for producers to be aware of.
Okay. You kind of touched on the rental package, so let's maybe discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So as producers, we're the ones generally working with the budget, changing numbers around as needed in the different areas. So like, what should we be keeping in mind when we're budgeting for gear rental cost?
So when looking at like the gear side of things, I think it's good to look at the different options that you have. Number one being hiring crew that already has the gear. Because they're an owner operator, it's going to mean that their overhead is way lower. The gear is an asset that they use to get on projects, so their rates for gear are usually lower than, say, your standard rental house, or even renting something like online from like something like Lens Pro to Go or lens rentals. There's also a beauty to that they are comfortable with their gear and they know it inside and out, versus having that's going to kind of potentially eliminate the need for a prep day. So say I'm rolling into a project with my grip van, I know that grip van inside and out because I've owned all the gear and I've worked on it with many projects. So I really could walk onto a set or drive onto a set with that package and not need a prep day. Mm-hmm. However, if we're renting a truck, or we're renting some gear that I have not worked with before, it's going to be important to have that rental for one extra day, which is going to end up costing money. So if you're really pinching pennies, that's a really good option. And it ends up putting more money into the pockets of your freelancers, which keeps them working, which ends up benefiting the industry overall and producers specifically, because you have good talent that's continuing to make a good income from their work. So you can get gear from the owner operator specifically, and that works well for probably smaller projects. But if you have a really robust project, working with a rental house is a really good thing. And I think that sometimes people just think about the gear that people own, and renting can seem like a big deal and seem really expensive. And it's almost like, oh man, if I would just rent this a couple times, like I could buy it. There's a couple really big advantages to renting gear, even though sometimes it can feel like a poor investment. One aspect is the gear is always going to be in good condition, and you're going to always have 3 or 4 replacements at the rental house if something goes wrong. And if a bulb goes out or whatever, you have sort of this helpline. And this is a huge benefit of local rental houses versus some of these online options, which are great and very affordable and convenient. It's like having a local rental house where you're working with people on a one-on-one basis. Like, they're going to make sure that you have what you need for your project. And if something goes wrong, you're going to be able to go to that rental house and be like, oh shoot, we actually need some more C-stands, or this light malfunction. Also, when it comes to gear, because there's money involved, it's really hard, I think, to keep from saying we're just going to try to bring it down as much as possible, because as a producer, you're the keeper of the budget. That's important for you to steward that. And I think that one thing to consider is sort of the insurance side of things, which I think I kind of mentioned earlier, where things can kind of feel expensive sometimes when you're signing the check for it on the front end. However, when you're in a pinch and you're using professional gear that's not going to break on set, this goes for camera, lighting, honestly, production, any department that you're using physical assets, quality gear, and having backup gear to wear for a variety of different situations, I think is super, super important. And that's the whole principle of a grip truck versus renting per item. Because if you were to make a rental for all the items on a grip truck and not do it bundled together, it would end up being more expensive than a grip van. There's a huge advantage to getting the bundle package of a grip truck, because you're going to have all these little items that you wouldn't really think of until you're in a moment where you're like, we need to solve this problem. And there just happens to be this item on the truck. And the trucks can seem a little bit more expensive if you're line iteming just the items that you know that you're going to need. But the insurance aspect of renting a grip truck is unbelievable, because whenever I bring my van onto a project, I know that I have this assortment of lighting stuff that I know that I'm going to use, but then I've got all this other stuff that's kind of included at a discount that I know that I can pull that out in a pinch. And say we expected to shoot indoors, and we were going to shoot this interview indoors or the scene, but then suddenly, for weather reasons or whatever, we change the location and it's outdoors. And are you going to suddenly be like, oh no, we have no lighting equipment for this kind of scenario? Or are you going to be like, oh yeah, we've got a 12 by or an 8 by on this truck. Like we can just pull that out real quick and just be able to pivot. Um, I think that if just being a very affordable production is the primary goal, a grip truck is not a good option for a producer. But if there's a lot at stake, I think that like renting a full van package or a truck package is a must have.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a good way to look at it and that cost difference that comes with those two different avenues. So, another pre production question I had for you is how can a producer help you when it comes to building out like a G&E team?
Um, I think it's really just kind of an open communication thing where um, a good way to start is reaching out to your gaffer and saying, who do you know that's good? Um, and do you have any recommendations? Starting there instead of pulling people initially, just from your own list, because that can keep there from being problems on set. Maybe these two people don't get along together, and it's like that may be something the producer doesn't know. Um, so just finding the right people for the job, I think it's good to chat with the gaffer, see if you can find that. But then if it's kind of like an out of state thing, a lot of times your gaffer's not going to have the connections. So I think that there's a lot of like good like websites like online where you can, some of these like private groups. I know like Video Village is one. Uh, there's a super secret film group as well. These are like two that I see people, producers will post on here and say, hey, we need someone for a shoot in this kind of location that they're not local to. Um, and then people are able to chime in and give recommendations to the people that they've worked with.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a huge thing. Um, I think it probably varies, like how involved your gaffer wants to be in the process. I think especially on movies or shows, something that's longer, I think it's really important to maybe even give your gaffer the opportunity to like, hey, you want to call this person up and chat with them. Um, I think certainly that if you're bringing in a gaffer, you should give your DP the opportunity before you lock in a gaffer chat with them just to make sure that they're jiving on things. And the DP can kind of vet more closely. Hey, does this gaffer know what they're talking about? And then on down the line, because again, if lighting isn't someone's department, it it's kind of might be hard to know just with a brief conversation. Does this person know what they're doing? And resumes aren't necessarily super helpful for breaking down, is this person good to work with on set? Are they going to just get to set and not be able to mesh with the rest of the crew
Mm-hmm.
as far as skill set wise? But I think that for commercials and stuff or corporate videos where it's just like a 1 day thing, it's probably more the producer's call. So I think that that's an important thing. If you just kind of need someone who's a grip and you get a single recommendation from someone you trust, uh, you can probably just hire them on. And um, but then for like features, I think it's really important to involve your your crew more in that decision making process. And I think that too, having the transparency with the producer and the gaffer and knowing kind of what experience level are we looking for, because sometimes you just get like a lighting PA and
Mm-hmm.
you're not actually getting like a career grip or gaffer. So I think being transparent upfront about rates is good too, because if someone says, hey, we're this is like full rate, then the the standard of who you're going to bring on is going to be higher, because you know you can bring on just about anyone. Um, However, if you're like, this is really a PA rate or just above a PA rate, like that's going to let me know like, oh, I'm not going to go ask people that I know that are going to need a higher rate.
Mm-hmm.
so then the gaffer can kind of vet a little bit more based on the budget needs. And then if the rate is like way too low, then you can have that conversation up front and be like, hey, this is a really key position and it's going to affect us on the shooting day. Then you can discuss that. But having an open conversation about what range of rates for the people below you is going to be is really important, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Once you get on set and production's happening, how can a producer be helpful to you or to the lighting department?
Yeah, I think that a producer or somebody on set who, because I know sometimes the producer is going to be more handling the locking in other locations or some things like that, but having some person who is sort of a representative from production, even if your first AD is kind of like that, which it's like it really shouldn't necessarily have to be that way, but sometimes the first AD is the one closest to knowing what solutions production might have. But like as problems come up, I think that having a producer or production representative on set can be really, really helpful. If, for example, say there's an issue with like parking and you need to figure out like you need to go park at someone's place and you need to like someone to go and like figure out if that's okay or find a solution to something. I think having someone in real time to help out with those things can be super, super helpful. And I think that especially near the beginning of a project, maybe at the end of a day on like your first day, having sort of a roundtable discussion, either at lunch or afterwards, and the producer kind of initiating hey, let's gather up the department heads and let's chat about this real quick, and not necessarily making a big deal out of it, just having the time where you gather to where someone could voice a concern. And this is probably relates to more on the movie side of things, because if you're on a one-day commercial and something goes wrong in the morning, it's like there's not a whole lot of time to like course correct.
Right.
But yeah, especially for movies, I think that having that open, letting people know that there's an open line of communication if they do have a problem, I think is really helpful and encouraging, because then you're like, oh, we're not in this alone, and there's people who are have a vested interest in making sure that we can do our best work. And even having a focus on that of like, I love it when I get to work with producers or honestly anyone on set who their energy goes towards, I want to help my fellow crew members do their best work, versus I'm just super focused on my job and like me doing my best work. It's like it's all focused outward on supporting the team and supporting the film sort of as an ecosystem. I think that just encourages the crew. And then once you say, hey, can we ask for grace on not doing like we need to get this last shot, like can we push back lunch for a second, or your crew is going to stick out your neck for you if you are showing that you're gonna have their back.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a good way to think about it, and how to work with them on set. All right, and then final question is just: is there anything that relates to a producer working with G&E you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think that this kind of relates to producers working with crew in general, not specifically Griffin Electric. If you as a producer take on, this is something I've thought about a lot recently, is that I kind of have the mentality of, if I take care of my my clients, so being producers, directors, people who that hire me to work on stuff, they're going to take care of me and continue to give me work. They're going to refer me to people, and they're going to have a vested interest in making sure that my business is successful. And that's just kind of been the philosophy that I've operated under. But I think that as a producer, if you take on that philosophy of, hey, these are people that make it so that I can create a project and never have to touch a camera or never have to touch a light. And you can bring on technicians that are really good at what they do. Like, having a vested interest in their success, I think, is really important. And like, I can feel it. Like, I can feel when there are people who are just, they're always undercutting rates on people, and they're not giving people the tools that they need, and there's not really a transparent conversation. It's just like the producer's just shopping around for a deal, and they don't really care about the people involved. Versus some people that I work for, I'm like, whoa, you like actually care about me at the end of the day, and that means that I'm going to stay up late the night before, making sure that every item is where it needs to be, and like the truck is a-okay and good to go. And it's gonna be things that you won't necessarily see, or you won't necessarily know, like, how would it played out differently if you hadn't had a vested interest in the success of your crew. But it's like, it will make an actual difference. And I think it just, like, I think I mentioned it earlier, if you have your crews back, not just on a single production, but as a freelancer and as a professional, because we all know that filmmaking is not it's not an easy profession. And to have allies who are like, I have a vested interest in seeing your career success overall, uh, and this is especially if you've worked together for a couple times, and um, sort of have developed a relationship with someone, um, really go to bat for them, and see to it that they can continue working and doing what they love to do, and they will make sure that you get the absolute best product at the end of the day, because they can feel that you're not just in it for yourself. You do care about the people that you're hiring. So that's what I would just throw out there as an encouragement to uh, producers to think about.
Those are definitely some great thoughts to end on. So thank you very much for coming on and chatting here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for doing this podcast. I think it's really cool that people are there's a platform where people are able to listen to different departments talking about some of these things.
Until next time, make sure to subscribe to the Producer Podcast, and thanks for listening.